Well, I might kick off and not leave you guys waiting too long to delve into these because it is very exciting what we're tasting today. Do I have the tasting order in chat? No, I don't. So I will share that now with everyone, just so we can get all your whiskies in a line. But yeah, I suppose I'll kick off. Welcome everyone to tonight's tasting for Infrequent Flyers. It is just me tonight. We have a small group, so I have given you guys the option to unmute yourselves if you did want to ask a particular question or provide tasting notes, which will be very relevant and very necessary because the postage gods have conspired against me. And despite having my tasting pack sent out express, it's been 5 days, it's still not here. I've been walking around to the post office for the last 3 days asking the guy, I'm like, did they drop it off yet by accident yet? And still no. So I do not have the whiskies in front of me. I will be partaking in a mass of whiskies that I have collected, some samples friends have given me. So I will be having whiskey with you, just not the whiskey you're tasting, which means that I'm wholly relying on you guys for tasting notes tonight. I've got a Rolodex of flavors I can reference, but I will have no idea what these whiskies taste like until the Australia Post decides to finally bestow upon me my whiskey, which I'm very concerned about because there's other bottles of whiskey in that same package. So fingers crossed, pray for me. But yeah, obviously the usual housekeeping to go over. If you've got the 5 glasses, we recommend it. Please don't drive after drinking these. I think they're all cask strength. One is insanely boozy, and it's the one I'm most excited about. So I'm heartbroken I won't be tasting it alongside you guys. All of our tastings are recorded as well for anyone who couldn't make it tonight or who wants to watch it back later. And they're all on our YouTube channel. And unfortunately, we couldn't have Alistair Walker join us, but we do have an Infrequent Flyers tasting that we recorded previously where he did join us and he told us a little bit more about him and his brand. So I'll just be going over a little bit of that today, but you can always check out that video as well on our YouTube page if you wanted to. I think that's about everything. Like I said, I'm relying on you guys to give me your feedback, your tasting notes, your, what you're vibing, what you're loving, any questions you might have, anything at all, pop it in the chat or, maybe raise a hand to unmute yourself if it's a quiet time. But yeah, I suppose we'll get cracking into it. So the first whiskey cab off the rank to start enjoying is the Glen Spey. And for those who aren't super familiar with the Infrequent Flyers brand, it's founded by Alistair Walker, who very much like his dad, Billy Walker, who is the Billy Walker from Glen. He loves to showcase distilleries that get overlooked, and a lot of Billy's ethos about reviving and revamping old distilleries that got unloved. I mean, Glendronach wouldn't be the behemoth that we see it as today if it hadn't been for Billy Walker stepping in and reviving it. And he's currently doing the same with Glen Distillery as well. Bummer he doesn't give his son many fun casks of Glen. We don't see too many Glen bottled by Infrequent Flyers, but that's fair enough. His dad probably wants to keep all the good stuff to himself. But most of the whiskies that he bottles come from Diageo distilleries. So I think we have 3 of them today, 2 or 3. And he also likes to acquire casks that are unusual for the distillery, for the type of cask that they are. And sometimes he'll do his own finishing and tweaking as well. But in the past, he's done rum, which is relatively normal. Lots of virgin oak finishes, which this Glen Spey is a virgin oak, double virgin oak maturation, I believe. And he's done things like Chickapin, which is a Native American oak varietal that the Native Americans used a lot. There's, I think, like a whole bunch of different uses that the tree has. But yeah, so is this anyone's first time having a Glen Spey? I know it's not super common at all. David, yeah, it's your first time. Jason as well. Michael, have you not had much Glen Spey? No? Wow, amazing. Awesome. Honestly, I haven't had a lot of Glen Spey either. It is really not one that you come across. It's been a Diageo distillery since 1997. It was originally built as Mill of Roths because it's right next to Glenrothes distillery. And so it was kind of a neighboring distillery. Eventually, it was sold to a London gin producer who wanted to branch out into whiskey and give that a bit of a dabble. And that's when the name changed to Glen Spey during that sale. And the gin producer wanted to create it as the home of Spey Royal, which was a blend that they put together that included Knockandoo and Strathmel. So yeah, it was always intended kind of for blending, even if it was, you know, someone who wanted to dabble into whiskey outside of gin. So eventually, through a series of mergers, that gin producer merged into another company, and then that company merged into Diageo. And so we only typically see it in the flora and fauna range, which is the kind of unofficial official bottling from Diageo releases. So distilleries like Dalhousie, Glen Spey, Linkwood, a lot of stuff that goes into the Johnnie Walker blends has a core bottling or a core release in the flora and fauna series. Michael, yes, double virgin oak finish. So it says that the cask type that was matured in is virgin oak, and then it says the cask finish is virgin oak, which is super bizarre. So I believe this one is full maturation in virgin oak, but it just spent time in 2 different virgin oak barrels. So what that really does to a spirit is you get those like green caramel and like apple notes from the longer maturation, and then you get more of those youthful spicy notes coming in towards the end of maturation once you put it in a virgin cask for a second time. So Leo, honeyed malt on the nose. Yeah. So the few single cask Glen Speys that I've had have always been like, what is it? Those like English muffin thingies, crumpets. That's it. Honeyed crumpets. It's got this like kind of a little bit green honeysuckle thing to it as well, typically. But again, that is just what I'm recalling from Glen Speys that I've had in the past. You can tell me if it's a similar kind of variety. Leo, French or Hungarian oak, not getting vanilla tones. Yeah, it does not say, unfortunately. It just says virgin oak, which is super clear and clarifying, especially for a brand that is, you know, I will tell you everything about it on the front label. It's like, what kind of virgin oak? I assume probably one of them would have been American virgin oak, but the other might be quite right. It might have been French oak to dry it out, but it doesn't say that on the label anywhere. Unfortunately, super annoying. Some sultana flavor on the palate and finish, Michael. Ooh, very nice. Oh, so this being a lot of people's first Glen Spey, what do you think of the distillery? Like, what do you know, is it something you're definitely gonna, you know, take a look at if it comes across your path again? Are we enjoying it? How are we feeling about it? Mm. And if you did want to unmute yourself to say, you can, because it is a small group today, and I'm flying solo and Ollie doesn't make the rules. So Michael, you have to have another variation. Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. I don't think I've ever had a Glen Spey in a sherry cask. I don't think it's something that happens. Leo, yeasty bread biscuit on the palate, quite dry. Fair enough. yeah, it's one of those distilleries that even if you do come across it, there's only a few types that it kind of sits in. I don't think I've ever had a sherry cask Glen Spey. There have been a few from the Scotch Malt Whisky Society that I've seen, but again, they've all been bourbon cask, ex-bourbon cask, because it is really just for blending into Johnnie Walker. And that's what Infrequent Flyers is all about. It's about showcasing these distilleries that are, high flying, amazing whiskies, so like amazing distilleries, but you don't see them frequently, you don't come across them, they get overlooked all the time. So I'm just enjoying a bit of Benrinnes here because people have been telling me all bloody week about Benrinnes. But yeah. Are we feeling eased into it? We're not certain how it ranks amongst the others yet. Is that kind of the vibe? Yeah, fair enough. All right. So the second whiskey on the tasting that we're going through is the Miltonduff 12-year-old Sauternes cask. So if you know me well, you know I love sugar. I'm an absolute sucker for anything sweet, and Sauternes is one of my absolute favorite styles of wine. It is a French semi-sweet typically white wine, made from Semillon grapes and a couple of different other grape varietals, Marsanne and stuff like that. And it's partially fermented in the same way that port style wines are, but not quite. It's probably closer to like a late harvest style of wine. But it's a bit annoying to get your hands on the wine itself. Noel, I am a massive fan of Sauternes cask whiskies as well. If you can get your hands on some Sauternes wine, that is also very excellent. I think I've got a couple of bottles that I told myself I was going to open for my wedding and then just never got around to it because it was COVID. So I should probably tuck into them soon. But yeah, so you're going to get that sweetness, but it is a finish, I believe. Beautiful nose, first sip had hot alcohol spirit, fair enough. So Miltonduff Distillery is not a Diageo distillery. They're part of we always call them stables, like they're bloody horses, but it's part of the Pernod Ricard stable. So Pernod Ricard and Chivas Brothers are the same company. It's like Jim Beam and Suntory. They're the same company. It's Beam Suntory. So even though Miltonduff belongs to Chivas Brothers and is a core part of the Chivas Brothers blend, not Chivas Brothers blend, sorry, part of the Ballantine's blend, which is the other blend that Pernod Ricard has. So they've got their Chivas Brothers and then their Ballantines and their other stuff. So there were no official bottlings of Miltonduff up until 2017, very, very recently. Before then, it was being bottled under Gordon and MacPhail. So Gordon and MacPhail took the opportunity for a long time to bottle whiskies from these major blending houses and have core bottlings, but not official bottlings. So you can get 15-year-old Mortlach and 25-year-old Mortlach and Linkwood, or at the very least you could. I don't know if they're changing that. I don't know if they're discontinuing those bottlings because Gordon and MacPhail is obviously pulling back on bottlings. But yeah, for the longest time, you could only get Miltonduff as a Gordon and MacPhail bottling officially. But Pernod Ricard decided, they were like, oh, okay, everyone's really into single malts now, and we should showcase some of our distilleries that we have. So, for example, Longmorn is one of the big ones that they own. But in 2017, they launched a 15-year-old Miltonduff under the Ballantines heading. And you might have seen a couple bottles. I know the Whisky Club has done some of the bottlings. I love that they thought Miltonduff couldn't stand on its own, so they had to put it under the Ballantyne's heading, which is like a bit heartbreaking. But yeah, the distillery originally started on a farm on the site of an abbey, abbey, monastery, whatnot. And the monks from the abbey would brew beer in some of the buildings and whatnot. And some bottlers choose to use Miltonduff's code name, which is Plucarden, because it was Plucarden Abbey. Typically, you see that in silver seal bottlings. Most of the time, everyone's just allowed to say Miltonduff on a bottle, like in this example. But I think it's fun to call it Plucarden sometimes. It makes it feel, old worldy, like monks are still making this whiskey, right? And the monks were distilling on the site for a while, and they were brewing there, and eventually they legalized it in 1824. There was as well another brand on site in 1964 where they added some Lohmann stills and they created a spirit called Moscatel. So if you see a bottle of Moscatel, which rare as hen's teeth now, that's from the same site as Miltonduff, just created on a different still. But yeah, they're a massive capacity distillery. Leo, I would have thought there was enough interest in wine. Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting to see how these brands, which have been around a long time, I mean, God, Miltonduff as a distillery has been around since the mid 1800s, but yet their parent company's like, nobody knows. We've done nothing to promote it whatsoever. So, we have to like slowly and carefully build up a brand name for it, which, look, I love all distilleries and especially the ones that get overlooked. One of my other personal favorites is Glen, which is another Diageo distillery, and like I just want them to get their moment in the sunlight, their 15 minutes of fame as it was. So yeah, I'm glad to see Miltonduff getting a little bit more interest and intrigue. It is kind of very similar to those like Glenfiddich vibes. David, a drop of water brought out dessert butterscotch hint. Nice. Michael, sweet, fruit driven, a bit of citrus as well. Yeah, I always see Miltonduff as being very much in the same vein as like your Glenfiddich, maybe erring a little bit towards that Glenlivet kind of flavor profile. And I mean, it's probably why they love it for blending and for use in the Ballantyne's blend. But yeah, it's super super interesting to see that more of these distilleries are getting, a little bit more of a showcase from their parent companies, and two of the whiskeys that we're gonna try today from Infrequent Flyers have core range bottlings that I think almost nobody knows or notices on a bottle shelf, which sometimes that's not always a bad thing. Sometimes you get a core bottling and you're like, do you understand your distillery? Do you know like what greatness it can achieve? And I think Mortlock was one of those brands for a long time. Mortlock just got disrespected by their parent company, and the indie bottlings are really beautiful showcases of what the spirit can actually do, and that's why we love people like Alistair who love to showcase what it can actually do. So Leo, a little too sweet for your taste. Straight bourbon barrel Miltonduff. Yeah, fair enough. I think you'd really like pure ex-bourbon barrel Miltonduff. It's a little bit brighter than Allt-a-bhainne, which I know you love. But yeah, I think it would be your jam and up your alley. Awesome. Oh, I'm so excited to see what the poll results are at the end of this, because I'm like the suspense is killing me not knowing how they taste myself. But yeah, so whiskey number 3 we're ready for it. Whiskey number 3 is the Benrinnes 16-year-old Moscatel finish. So has anybody tried the Benrinnes 16-year-old PX cask from Darkness that the whiskey club, the single malt whiskey club put out recently? Has anyone tried that? No? Neither have I, but they've had it at our shows for the last 3 months. I should have gone out to try it. But I personally think this is probably a sister cask to that release. That was again 16 years old, similar ABV, but finished in a PX cask. This is obviously finished in a Moscatel cask. And the main difference there being Moscatel is made using Moscatel grapes, and it's treated and fermented in a slightly different way, whereas PX sherry is using Pedro Ximénez grapes only, and treated and fermented slightly different. Every other type of sherry is made using Palomino grapes for the most part, like Oloroso and Fino and Manzanilla and stuff like that. So, but Moscatel is probably the closest genetically similar grape to PX. Pedro Ximénez grape. So once I get my sample, I'm totally gonna try and compare them side by side with the PX finish one. But yeah, just like the Glen Spey, it's a Diageo distillery, and the only official bottling is the Flora and Fauna range, which is shockingly fully sherry matured. Typically, Benrinnes is a distillery we do see a lot of in independent bottlings, but it's predominantly ex-bourbon cask. So perhaps Diageo is just holding on to all those sherry matured Benrinneses, like just those kind of classic refill sherry hogsheads and whatnot. But it's got this the spirit itself has quite a meaty quality. The way that they distill Benrinnes is it's either 2.4 times distilled or 2.7 times distilled. One of those weird numbers where you're like, this doesn't make sense. And when you get them to explain it to you, it makes even less sense. Because of the way that the pipes and the line arms and all of that and the reflux capacities of the still, super, super interesting. But yeah, so it's quite a meaty spirit, which is probably why Diageo holds on to it quite strongly, because that's quite valuable to them in terms of the texture quality for their Johnnie Walker blends. The distillery itself hasn't had the easiest life, I will say. It was built in 1826 and destroyed in a flood only 3 years later. So terrible timing on that. And then about 50 years later, it caught fire. So the 1800s was not a good century for the distillery. And originally was built for the Duros blend, so Duros white label, which was really, really massive during the 1900s, particularly in America. It still is one of the biggest selling blends in America. But the original company that created Duros merged into Diageo, who then gave it a complete facelift and introduced triple distillation in 1974, but they abandoned that in 2007. So there's been no triple distillation at Benrinnes for a while. And in 1998, Diageo actually sold off a lot of assets, and they sold off they sold off Duros white label blend. They sold off quite a few, a lot of the distilleries that went into it. And Benrinnes was the only one that they were like, no, you can't have it. We're keeping it. We need this distillery. And so it's pretty much just been left orphaned from its blend sister distilleries, I suppose you could say. So really, really cool stuff. And such a funky, I always get a fermented fruit. Leo says a drop of water brings out the different flavor profile of pineapple and mango. I always get fermented tropical fruit off of Benrinnes. So I'm really excited to see that that character carries through even with that Moscatel. Michael's quite dry, probably do the Moscatel finish. Yeah. Yeah, cool. Nice. So I take it like it's not a super sweet, it is quite, neutral or quite dry by comparison to what you'd expect from a fortified wine cask. Probably. I love watching Michael and Leo just sniff in tandem. It was beautiful. It was like art. Yeah. What are we thinking so far? Because I know we're starting to get a bit hotter with the ABV as well. They're not really sweet. Water definitely brings out the tropics. I love that. Hmm. I think that's always an interesting thing as well when you are like bottling these under the radar distilleries. Is like, do you leave them at cask strength or do you bottle them lower, showcasing like the range and the variability? Obviously, I'm not Alistair. I can't decide how to bottle these whiskies, but it sounds from everyone like a couple of drops of water made a massive difference in the flavor profile. Just interesting. I'll definitely be adding water to mine when I get it. So, nice. Sweet oily residual flavor. Yeah, Leah, that I think that like oily texturalness is part of that, like, because it's quite a sulfurous whiskey. Coconut on the nose. This is so hard not being able to try them. um, you're all doing a great job of making me very envious. Um, but yeah, I think that I have always found Benrinnes is such a sulfurous whiskey. And obviously, like when you talk about sulfur and whiskey, people are like, that's a bad thing. It's not always a bad thing. Sometimes it's like it's spirit sulfur and not cask sulfur. And spirit sulfur is great. Um, but yeah, and I think that like oily, a little bit meaty, a little bit funky characteristic. And especially when you've got like, it's no secret that the Johnnie Walker blends are chill filtered. Like, you know, you're already stripping out all these congeners, all these fatty acid compounds, all these lovely, delicious things that come with the whiskey. So you've got to have a spirit character that can stand up to being chill filtered in that way and can like still convey its flavor profile through chill filtering. So yeah, it's really interesting. I'm actually working on an article about flock with a little bit of chill filtering, and it's so interesting to kind of look at the chemistry side of it. Good meaty funkiness, what I got on the nose. Yeah, fair enough. Cool. Nice. Alrighty. So the last two whiskies that we have are both the whiskies where I was talking about there is a core release. There is now an official bottling that's only come about in the last 5 or so years, but it gets totally, totally overlooked. So whiskey number 4, the Royal Brackla. So I haven't had Royal Brackla in a Madeira cask finish before, I don't believe. But Royal Brackla, speaking of, the Dewar's brands being sold to Bacardi back in 1998, Royal Brackla was one of those former distilleries that was bought up by Bacardi. So actually, when Bacardi went, when Diageo was like, yeah, no, we're offloading these assets, and Bacardi, went into negotiations to buy some of these distilleries, they're like, yeah, we'll give you this one and that one. We'll give you Royal Brackla and we'll give you Craigellachie, and you can have Aberfeldy as well. Yeah, that's fine. And Bacardi came to the table. They're like, we want Altmore. And they're like, we don't want to give you Altmore. And they're like, the deal's off if you don't give us Allt-a-bhainne distillery. So it's a really, really fascinating, kind of insight into the way that these big companies trade distilleries like Pokemon cards. And yeah, so it's really, really interesting. Obviously, Benrinnes is no longer part of the Dewar's blend, but Royal Brackla makes up Royal Brackla, along with Allt-a-bhainne, makes up the majority peated portion of the Dewar's blend, even though it is only lightly peated. So it's I think it's about like 5 to 10 ppm, something like that. Michael, you love the 1821 Allt-a-bhainne. So yeah, Allt-a-bhainne is great. Bacardi knew what they were doing when they negotiated to get that distillery in the deal. But yeah, so before Royal Brackla was sold to Bacardi, they did have a Flora and Fauna release, a 10-year-old during their time as a Diageo distillery. But nowadays, Bacardi has launched a core release with Royal Brackla. They've got a 12, an 18, and a 21-year-old, which were launched in around 2020, which was terrible timing for them. But really, really interesting to kind of see that Bacardi wants to showcase Royal Brackla as a distillery. And particularly interesting that they've really amplified in the core range that peatiness. Leo's not keen on Allt-a-bhainne. To be fair, I'm not massively keen on Allt-a-bhainne either because of that funkiness. Sometimes I'll find one where I'm like, oh, I'm gonna keep you that one. But yeah, so it's super interesting to see how how they kind of treat the brand, and it is worlds different from what we taste in a lot of independent bottlings. For me personally, the core note that I usually get from Royal Brackla is if you rolled a jelly bean in ash. There's that like ashy savoriness to it, but that sweet jelly, gelatinous jelly bean kind of characteristic coming through. So obviously the brand originally started out as Brackla Distillery, and despite the original founder, Captain William Fraser, being incredibly unpopular and widely hated by everyone in the region because he tried to stamp out illicit and distillation. When he built his distillery, Royal Brackla became the first distillery in Scotland to receive a royal warrant. So they were able to change the name from Brackla to Royal Brackla in 1835. So they got a seal of approval from King William IV at the time, and it became known as the King's Own Whisky. Now you've got Royal Lochnagar as well, which actually sits on Balmoral Estate, I believe. They are the only other open Royal Warrant distillery. There was also Glenurry Royal, which has been demolished. So you can't get Glenurry Royal anymore. So yeah, it's just these two. Apparently Royal Brackla is very, very beautiful. And they use, despite, they're separating it quite strongly now between they've got their core range and their core stuff, and most of the aged stuff goes into their core range. But they produce 3.5 million liters of whiskey per year. So a lot of that is still really going into the Dewar's blend. And like I said, Dewar's is one of the most popular blended whiskies in America. So they have a lot of capacity to keep up with. And we don't see a lot of it in independent bottlings anymore. Sorry, I've got hiccups. Yeah, we don't see too much of it in independent bottlings. And yeah, like I was saying before as well, the core range that they've now released does tend to get overlooked. I would say I'm not a fan of the 12-year-old, but the 18 and the 21-year-old Royal Brackla are quite nice. I don't know the price point, so I don't know if it's worth it for the price point. But yeah, and I think with what we were talking about, with what I was talking about with Miltonduff getting so not getting the attention and it receives as a single malt out being launched out into the market, I think Royal Brackla really is like a showcase of, it's a high age statement. It's a distillery that's been around a long time, and they finally get out into the core market, and people are like, I don't know what that is. I'm not going to, risk money on a bottle. And I think that's the true tragedy, right? But which is why we like to do these virtual tastings, so you can try things, try all of the things beforehand. All right. Michael's getting a bit of white fruit flavor profile. Oh, like white peaches? Like, maybe like jasmine flowers? Because I sometimes get jasmine flowers or frangipanis. That's it. Frangipanis off of Royal Brackla. Ashiness on the finish, drop water, leatherwood honey. Yeah, really closed nose. It is, what's the ABV on that? 57.2%. So that might also be, it's doing it as well. So, balance and smoother, gladly I said leather. Yeah, old bookshelf. I love that. Like, old books is really just my shorthand for leather. And sometimes you get different leather because, so my husband briefly went through a phase of being really into leatherworking. So I learned a lot about leather and uh and like freshly veg tan leather, veg tan being the stuff you make bags out of, not clothes out of. Like the smell of fresh veg tan leather versus like old dusty leather, and yeah, there's layers to everything. And yeah, no, old bookshelf as well, maybe like a little bit papery, like that, parchmenty kind of thing as well. Yeah, nice. Cool. So is this anyone's first Royal Brackla as well, actually? David? Yeah. Yeah, Ian and Karen are like, oh yeah, maybe. Michael, yeah, it is. It's such a cool whiskey, and it was one of the first I tried. One of the first independently bottled whiskeys that I tried, and this was back before I realized that peated whiskey was great. And I think I tried some early core range Royal Brackla, and I was like, nah, this tastes like someone ashed in my mouth. I'm not about this. I'm not okay with this. And then my next Royal Brackla was an independent bottling, and I was like, this. Why is it not this all of the time? So yeah, I think independent bottlings of Royal Brackla are really, really worth it. David, you pair it with cigar. This is absolutely a cigar pairing whiskey. I don't think I've seen it much in sherry casks, but I think that sweetness and that like ashiness in the ex bourbon and even the Madeira, with that like little bit of fruitcakey finishing it off, is absolutely. I don't smoke cigars, but I love the smell of cigars, and this would absolutely work. That would be amazing. Ooh. All right. Now, the last whiskey that we have today is actually the one that I was so excited about, and like most looking forward to. And I'm absolutely heartbroken that I won't be able to taste it along with you. Oh, Leo, Whiskey in the Park with Cigars. Done. Sold, even though we're all in totally different states. Yeah, so this last fifth whiskey is literally the one I am most excited about. So this is pronounced Allt-a-bhainne. The BH is a V sound. Um, I think it is technically slightly different pronunciation, but Allt-a-bhainne is the closest I'm going to get with my pronunciation ability. As Leo's already assessed from staring at it, but also you might have seen from the picture, it is dark. It is a very, very dark whiskey. So this is fully matured in a PX sherry Puncheon, I believe. And like most of the Allt-a-bhainne independent bottlings that you do see, the very, very rare ones that you do see, are super duper sherry cask. Michael probably first fill sherry puncheon, yeah, probably. Allt-a-bhainne is one of my favorite distilleries. I have a massive soft spot for it, and especially when it's in sherry casks. So we rarely ever see this distillery in indie bottlings, and they do have a core range release, which was marketed really funny. I'll tell you about that in a bit. But Allt-a-bhainne is a super modern distillery. And I say super modern in that my brain is perpetually stuck that the 90s were only 10 years ago, but they weren't. They were 30 years ago, and we're all old, and we should all be terrified. But Allt-a-bhainne was built in 1975. So it was built by the Canadian firm Seagram. So Seagram needed a large amount of whiskey for their Chivas Regal range. And while blends were booming in the 70s, the boom did not last. And while Allt-a-bhainne still contributes to a large amount of Chivas and a bit of Valentine's, and we're also lit today under Pernod Ricard, it has been closed a few times during the few downturns that came through in the 80s and 90s. But it was mothballed between 2003 and 2005, which is why we typically only get older Allt-a-bhainnes or very young Allt-a-bhainnes out on the market. This would have been just after they reopened. I can count. Yes, just after they reopened. Quick maths. But Allt-a-bhainne was actually the first distillery designed to be operated by only one person. So Seagram's was, we don't think of Canadians as miserly, we just think of them as polite. But Seagram's was very, very fiscally conscious, and so they wanted to be able to produce a massive amount of whiskey with minimal amount of effort and time and money. So the distillery produces around 4 million liters per year. And that's 4 stills, 1 person working there, which is absolutely crazy. All the equipment is in one room, so it's easily accessible. And yeah, just absolutely wild. They are mostly used for blending. They do have the core range, which is a no age statement, that was foolishly marketed as shockingly peated Speyside at 1 ppm, just so silly. I think their early marketing, they came out and they were like, oh, the first peated Speyside. It's like, mate, you're so late to the game. You're decades late to the game, if not a century. Calm down, you're fine. But because of kind of their modernity, I always feel like Allt-a-bhainne is like that person who they're slightly too old to be a millennial, but they're like barely out of Gen X, and they're like, oh, I'm trying to be cool, man. And they're a little bit out of place. So I have a massive soft spot for the distillery, but the spirit itself as well. And you can taste this in the core range, which at first open does not smell good, does not taste good. You need to leave that bottle out for like a week. Just open it and then leave it for a week and let it oxidize before it is the characteristics of Allt-a-bhainne. I personally always get apricots. Now I know this is a full maturation PX sherry puncheon, and I've had one before from an independent bottler out of Japan called Kingsbarn that was only 7 years old, and it tasted like liquid apricot muesli bars. So I'm really curious to see if you guys are getting apricots or if the PX is very dominant and we're getting more raisins and stuff. Leo, you love it as a sherry grenade rather than a sherry bomb. Sherry claymore, you know, claymore or whatever. Just sit in front of you and it's and yes, the one person running a distillery does sound like a work safety issue. I know that, you know, it's a bit you need two people for a ladder, right? You know, you should need more than one person for a distillery. So yeah, PX dominates dried fruits, raisins, sultanas. Now I think this is, am I correct in assuming this is probably the first Allt-a-bhainne for most everyone in the room? Yeah, yeah, fair enough. What are we thinking of it? Are we, I know that this is quite an intense sherry, so it's a little bit, you know, more, you're perhaps not getting as much of the core spirit shining through as you might normally. So what are we feeling? And I will run the poll in a few minutes, so we will properly declare which is the winner. Dark fruit is dominating. Okay, fair enough. Now I'm really curious again to try that whiskey myself because I'm familiar with the distillery, but only barely. So I'm really, really curious to see how this one goes. Are we finding it drinkable for the 62, what is it? Like 62.3% ABV? Is it super drinkable? Karen's nodding yes. Yeah. That is what surprises me most about this distillery is I tried that Kingsbarn I was talking about was like 64% ABV and I was drinking it like water. I was like, this is so good. You can't taste the alcohol. Oh God, I'm in trouble now. But yeah, it holds the ABV so well, which is amazing. Leo drop water again makes a difference. Michael, bit of black forest cherry. All right. Well, I will launch the poll so that we can have an official vote on the top whiskies of the night. I believe you can pick two. I think that's how Ollie set it up. We got to do this so that Ollie knows that we didn't just hang out here talking smack. And so that we, you know, we can see which whiskey is the pick of the night. Right. 1 more minute. Right. I think those are all the answers we are going to get. It is a small group, as I said. So the Allt-a-bhainne, but only just. I'm surprised and impressed by, you know, how much love the Royal Brackla got and the Miltonduff, but the Royal Brackla in particular, it's one of those ones where, you know, it can be a bit, ooh, not sure about this. So I'm glad to see that there's love for it there. Now, where is it? Now I would encourage you as we're at the end of the tasting, because we're in a small group, before, you know, we've got a couple of minutes left because there was only 5 whiskies and it is just me tonight. If you guys wanted to ask any questions, I have allowed you to unmute yourselves so you can ask away if you have any, and hopefully I can answer. Hi, Stephen.
Hi. I mean, the Scotch Malt Whisky Society is about to do a Guinness Book of Records attempt, but I don't think I've ever seen a person lead a whiskey tasting who doesn't have the whiskies in front of them. I think he did an outstanding job considering. And what it also goes to show is that the house style of the whiskey still comes through. So some of the things that you said were clear in the whiskies that we tried tonight. I thought, especially in relation to the Royal Brackla, So I got the jelly beans. I don't know if I got the what was it, the ash or the soot or the yeah. So well done, Emma.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, look, I'll let you in on a secret. There have been tastings in the past where my tasting pack did not arrive or forgot to be sent out to me. And I have had to rely on my, I like to call it the Rolodex of flavors that I've compiled from years of trying whiskey. So I know what core, like this distillery plus this cask, these are the flavors that it should present. But yeah, there have been other tastings where I have not had the whiskey. I'm like just drinking other whiskey at the time, like, yes.
Well, either the house style is strongly suggestive, or basically when somebody says something and they can try it, we all think we can taste it as well.
Yeah.
So somebody said something about the Sauternes on one of them, and I don't think I got that until it was suggested to me, and then I could get it.
Yeah. I think it's one of those things, you know, you develop it over time. And sometimes I think, you know, when I was working at Whisky Now, we would taste things together, and I would have it. I'm like, man, this tastes like lime peels, and then someone else would be like, lime peels, and I'm like, yes. Are we just psychic, or are we actually tasting the same note?
Tell me, what do you think about the use of PX? It's a challenging. Sorry, did I interrupt somebody? David, did I interrupt you? Okay, it's challenging because it's so. Can't think of the right word. I used the wrong word. It's overpowered. So there's always this conflict between the spirit and the sherry.
Yeah.
In your experience, I mean, Oloroso and even Fino I can come to terms with more easily, and I love the PX because you know it's sweet and luscious, and we all love it. But what do you think about it in terms of whiskey casks? Glen do it well, but even then, I think their Oloroso I think are better.
Yeah, I think that it's, you got to have the right spirit. Like you got to have a spirit that can stand up to it. Heavily peated spirits do really well, or you know, distilleries that have a lot of natural distillery character, like I was saying, Benrinnes holds up to sherry and PX cask really well, but Miltonduff tends to fall apart a little bit. Glen is another distillery one I was talking about previously. Beautiful, soft, delicate distillery character, does not handle sherry cask well. It turns into Chinese 5-spice and Angostura bitters. But yeah, I think it's, again, we all love sugar. Our brains are wired for sugar, right? And PX is just sugar. So yeah, I think it has its place for sure, as long as the distillery can handle it, you know, if that makes sense. I think there's a lot of distilleries where I'm like, it should live in ex-bourbon cask, like Miltonduff. I'm like, it should just live in ex-bourbon cask and stay there because it's perfect there. But then other distilleries, you're like, oh, you needed a bit more. Auchentoshan is a great one. I can't stand Auchentoshan when it's in bourbon cask unless it's been matured for a really long time, unless it's been handled really well, because it is such a neutral spirit. It needs body, it needs flavor, it needs a lot being given to it. And so I think that's why even the distillery itself, a lot of their releases are very sherry heavy, because they know that, you know, it needs a little bit more. But if it was perhaps more floral spirit, or, you know, even something like Jura only works in sherry when it's a certain age. So I think it's like it's like getting to know your own child, right? Like you're not going to force your kid to do sports if they're naturally quite artistic. And I think distillers need to approach the way that they make whiskey in the same way. You're not going to force the whiskey into this to work with this cask type when it's just never going to happen. So I think hopefully that's a good answer for you.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. David, did you have a question as well? No, just want to say hello. Fair enough. Well, is there any more questions? Otherwise, I might wrap it up. And then we can maybe just continue on to chats if you guys are keen. to stick around for a small chat afterwards, or if you've got places to be, that is totally fine as well. All good. Amazing. Well, thank you everyone, and thank you to anyone who is watching this video back. It's been very exciting to take you through these infrequent flyers. It has done so much to make me so excited for when these samples finally arrive. These Australia Post. Hopefully they're not lost forever. But yeah, thank you so much to everyone for joining me tonight. And yeah, if you wanted to hang around for a little bit longer to chat, I will turn off the recording now, because there's the stop.